The heavy, suffocating silence in my parents' living room felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I sat on the edge of the stiff, floral-patterned sofa, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had turned completely white. Across from me, sitting in matching wingback chairs, were my parents, Arthur and Helen, standing behind them, leaning against the mantelpiece with an air of tragic nobility, was my older brother, Julian. Julian was 32, 3 years older than me, and the undisputed, untarnished golden child of the family. He was wearing a rumpled cashmere sweater and designer jeans, looking disheveled in a highly curated, expensive sort of way. He was staring at the floor, playing the role of the broken, defeated entrepreneur to absolute perfection. "I just don't understand why you are making this so difficult, Nora," my mother, Helen, said. Her voice was sharp, laced with that familiar, grating tone of profound disappointment she always reserved exclusively for me. "Your brother is in trouble. Real, terrifying trouble. And you are sitting there hoarding your money like a miser while he is about to lose everything." I swallowed hard, trying to push past the massive lump of anxiety in my throat. "Mom, it's not about hoarding. You're asking me for $320,000. That is my entire life savings. Every single penny I have." "It's not your entire life," my father, Arthur, snapped, his face flushing an angry shade of red. He leaned forward, pointing a thick finger at me. "You just sold that software app of yours. We read the article online. We know you cleared $500,000. You have more than enough to help Julian and still be perfectly fine." The sheer audacity of his statement made the blood roar in my ears. Yes, I had sold an app. I was a freelance software developer. For the last 8 years, I had lived in a tiny, drafty studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old car with a broken heater, eating ramen noodles, and working 100-hour weeks. I had poured my absolute soul, my youth, and my health into building a cybersecurity program from scratch. When a major tech firm finally bought it out 3 months ago, it was the first time in my entire life I had ever felt financially secure. I had planned to finally buy a house. I had planned to start living. And within 90 days of my success, my family, who had never once supported my business, had summoned me to this room to demand I hand over the lion's share of it to Julian. To understand the absolute toxic absurdity of this dynamic, you have to understand Julian's place in the family hierarchy. From the moment he was born, Julian was treated like a prince. When it was time for college, my parents took out a massive second mortgage on their home to send him to a prestigious, out-of-state private university, where he majored in business management and spent 4 years partying. When it was my turn for college, my parents suddenly claimed they were broke. "You're smart, Nora. You'll figure it out," my mother had said breezily. I worked 2 jobs and took out crippling student loans to attend a local state college. When Julian graduated, he decided he didn't want to work for a corporation. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents emptied their retirement accounts to fund his first venture, a high-end boutique gym that went bankrupt in less than 18 months. Did they blame Julian? No. They blamed the economy. They blamed the location. They blamed everyone but the golden boy who was never taught the meaning of the word consequence. And now, Julian's latest venture, a luxury organic restaurant concept, had spectacularly imploded. According to the tearful, dramatic story he had just spun in the living room, he had been the victim of predatory lenders, a corrupt business partner who had fled the country, and catastrophic supply chain issues. He owed $320,000 to private creditors who were threatening to seize his assets, ruin his credit forever, and possibly pursue criminal charges for unpaid vendor invoices. "I would never ask if I wasn't desperate, Nora," Julian said softly, finally looking up from the floor. He possessed a terrifyingly effective, charismatic puppy dog look. I was totally blindsided. "My partner took the operating capital and vanished. The creditors are coming after me personally. If I don't clear this debt by the end of the month, they're going to take my house. They're going to destroy my life." "He was betrayed, Nora," my mother cried, wiping a tear from her cheek. "He trusted the wrong people. It's not his fault. How can you sit there and watch your own flesh and blood face absolute ruin when you have the power to stop it?" Why can't he declare bankruptcy? I asked, my voice trembling. That's what LLCs are for, Mom. The corporate veil protects his personal assets. He signed personal guarantees, my father roared, slamming his fist onto the coffee table. Because he believed in his business. Because he has passion. Something you wouldn't understand. Hiding behind a computer screen all day. Bankruptcy will ruin him. It will destroy his reputation in the business community. He will never be able to get a loan or start a company again. So he should ruin my future instead? I shot back, the tears finally springing to my eyes. I worked for a decade for that money, Dad. I didn't go out. I didn't take vacations. I built something from nothing, with zero help from you. How dare you? My mother shrieked, standing up. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Family must sacrifice for each other. When Julian gets back on his feet, he will pay you back every single cent. But right now, he is drowning, and you are throwing him an anchor. I promise, Nora, Julian pleaded, taking a step toward me, placing a hand over his heart. It's a loan. I already have investors lined up for a new tech startup idea. I just need to clear this hurdle so I can pass the background checks. I swear on my life, I will pay you back within 2 years with interest. Please. You're my little sister. I need you. The manipulation was a masterclass. They surrounded me, a suffocating triangle of guilt, shame, and emotional blackmail. They knew exactly which buttons to press. Despite a lifetime of neglect, there was still a pathetic, broken part of my inner child that desperately wanted their approval. I wanted to be the hero. I wanted my parents to look at me the way they looked at Julian. The pressure in the room was crushing. My father was glaring at me with utter contempt. My mother was weeping, clutching her chest as if I were physically stabbing her. Julian was looking at me like a martyr on the cross. Okay, I whispered, my voice breaking. Okay, I'll do it. My mother let out a massive, dramatic gasp of relief, rushing forward to hug me. My father nodded, his expression shifting from rage to a smug, satisfied victory. Julian let out a long breath, smiling thinly. Thank you, Nora, Julian said smoothly. I'll have my lawyer send over the wire transfer instructions tomorrow morning. It just needs to go directly into my primary holding account so I can disperse it to the creditors. No. The words slipped out of my mouth before I had even fully processed it. I gently pushed my mother away and stood up. I was shaking, but a sudden, strange moment of clarity had pierced through the emotional fog. Julian stopped smiling. What do you mean, no? You just said you'd do it. I said, I will pay the debt. I clarified, my voice growing steadier. I am not wiring $320,000 into your personal holding account, Julian. Nora, don't be ridiculous, my father snapped. He knows who he owes the money to. Just wire him the funds so he can handle his business. If I am liquidating my life savings to bail him out, I said, locking eyes with my brother, I am doing it professionally. I am not throwing $350,000 into the dark. I want a complete, comprehensive list of every creditor, every outstanding invoice, and every predatory loan. I will have a professional financial auditor review the liabilities, and my auditor will wire the funds directly to the creditors to clear the debt. Julian's face went rigid. The charismatic, desperate puppy dog look vanished entirely, replaced by a sudden, sharp flash of panic. That's not necessary, Nora. It's too complicated. It will take too much time. It's the only way I'm doing it, I said firmly, finding my backbone. If you are truly drowning in vendor debt and predatory loans, then an auditor will simply verify the amounts, secure the settlement releases, and pay them off directly. That protects both of us. It ensures the debt is legally cleared, and it ensures you don't get hit with massive tax liabilities for a sudden cash influx. She's right, Julian, my father muttered, surprisingly. He was a man who respected corporate bureaucracy. Direct disbursement is cleaner. It leaves a paper trail. Julian swallowed hard. He looked at my mother, silently begging her to intervene, but even Helen looked confused by his resistance. Julian, honey, if it gets the creditors off your back, just let her do it her way. Fine, Julian forced out through gritted teeth, though his jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. Fine, but we need to move fast. Who is this auditor? His name is Marcus Vance, I said. Marcus was a forensic accountant I had met during a massive cybersecurity audit for one of my former clients. He was brilliant, utterly uncompromising, and terrifyingly thorough. He was a man who could find a missing dollar in a labyrinth of 1,000 shell companies. Get me the login credentials for your business accounts and the contact information for your creditors by tonight, I told Julian. Marcus will review them tomorrow. If the numbers match your story, I'll sign the authorization release on Wednesday. I walked out of my parents' house that evening feeling sick to my stomach. I had agreed to give away my future, but as I drove back to my tiny apartment, the memory of Julian's sudden, sharp panic when I mentioned the auditor kept playing on a loop in my mind. If he was truly just a victim of a bad business partner and cruel market forces, why was he so terrified of a professional looking at his books? The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of tension. Julian dragged his feet sending the documents. He claimed his banking portals were locked. He claimed his accountant was on vacation. He sent over heavily redacted PDFs that looked like they had been screenshotted and cropped. I forwarded everything immediately to Marcus Vance. I paid Marcus a premium, expedited retainer fee out of my own pocket to prioritize the file. This is a mess, Nora, Marcus had told me over the phone on Tuesday afternoon. These PDFs are practically useless. I need direct, read-only access to his primary banking feeds. Tell him, if he doesn't provide the digital authentication tokens, I can't verify the debt, and I won't authorize the transfer of your funds. I called Julian and relayed the ultimatum. He screamed at me. He called me a controlling, paranoid bitch. He called my parents, who subsequently blew up my phone, accusing me of torturing my brother in his darkest hour. If you don't want to help him, just say so, my mother had shrieked over the phone. Stop playing these sadistic games with his life. Mom, I am literally trying to hand him $300,000. I yelled back, my own patience finally snapping. All he has to do is prove where the money is going. If he doesn't give Marcus the login by 5 p.m., I am walking away. 10 minutes before the deadline, Julian sent the authentication tokens. I didn't hear from Marcus for the rest of the night. I paced my apartment, unable to sleep, consumed by a gnawing, dreadful anxiety. Part of me hoped Marcus would call and tell me everything was exactly as Julian had said, that my brother was just an unlucky businessman. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted my family to be normal. On Wednesday morning, my phone finally rang. It was Marcus. Nora, Marcus said. His voice wasn't professional and detached anymore. It was remarkably grim. It was the voice of a doctor about to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Did you verify the creditors? I asked, holding my breath. Nora, I need you to listen to me very carefully, Marcus said slowly. I am not executing any wire transfers today. I have compiled a comprehensive financial report based on the raw data from your brother's integrated accounts. You need to call a meeting with your parents and your brother. Today. What's wrong? I whispered, my blood running cold. Is the debt worse than he said? Is he in trouble with the mob or something? The meeting, Nora, Marcus insisted, refusing to elaborate. Book a conference room. I am bringing a projector. They need to see this with their own eyes. Do not, under any circumstances, let them bully you into signing anything before I arrive. I rented a neutral, glass-walled conference room at a high-end co-working space downtown. I told my parents and Julian that we were meeting there to finalize the legal paperwork for the debt payoff. They arrived at exactly 1 p.m. My parents walked in looking triumphant. My mother was practically vibrating with relief. Julian walked in wearing a sharp, tailored suit, having seemingly regained his arrogant, golden boy swagger overnight. He thought he had survived the audit. He thought the money was practically in his pocket. This is incredibly excessive, Nora, my father grumbled, taking a seat at the long, polished table. Renting a boardroom? We could have done this at the house. It's fine, Dad, Julian said, offering me a magnanimous, forgiving smile. Nora just wants to feel like a corporate big shot for a day. If signing a few extra papers makes her feel secure about the loan, I'm happy to humor her. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded, feeling a bizarre sense of detachment. I didn't say anything. I just watched them. I watched the absolute, unwavering certainty they had that they were entitled to my life's work. At 1:05 p.m., the glass door to the conference room swung open. Marcus Vance walked in. He was a tall, imposing man in a pristine charcoal suit, carrying a heavy silver laptop and a stack of manila folders. He possessed an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. He didn't look like an accountant. He looked like an executioner. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. He didn't offer to shake anyone's hand. He walked straight to the front of the room, plugged his laptop into the multimedia console, and powered on the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall. "Mr. Vance, I presume," Julian said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "Do you have the creditor disbursement releases ready? I have a meeting with my new investors at 3, so I'd like to expedite this." Marcus didn't look at Julian. He opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Mr. Julian Hawthorne," Marcus said, his voice ringing coldly in the quiet room. "You approached your sister, Miss Nora Hawthorne, requesting a sum of $320,000. You stated, both verbally and in preliminary written communications, that this money was required to clear outstanding vendor debts, predatory business loans, and supply chain liabilities associated with the collapse of your restaurant LLC. Is that correct?" "Yes," Julian said, his smile faltering slightly at the intense, interrogative tone, "which I'm sure you verified." "I am a forensic auditor, Mr. Hawthorne," Marcus said, pulling a laser pointer from his breast pocket. "I do not verify PDFs. I verify digital footprints. When you finally provided the authentication tokens for your primary banking portals, I did not just look at the last 30 days. I ran a comprehensive algorithmic deep dive into your financial history over the last 36 months. I traced the money flowing into your LLC, and more importantly, I traced exactly where it flowed out." Marcus pressed a button on his remote. The massive screen on the wall blinked to life. "What I found," Marcus announced to the room, "was not a failed restaurant business. What I found was a spectacular, meticulously documented chronicle of fraud, embezzlement, and profound psychological deception." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What are you talking about? How dare you insult my son?" "Let him speak, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a whip. Marcus pressed the button again. A massive, heavily detailed spreadsheet appeared on the screen, highlighted with bright red, yellow, and green transaction markers. The moment the spreadsheet appeared, Julian's face went the color of wet ash. He didn't just look panicked. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click. "Let us begin with the predatory business loans," Marcus said, his laser pointer highlighting a massive column of red numbers. "You do, indeed, owe exactly $320,000, Julian. But you do not owe it to vendors. You do not owe it to the bank. And you certainly do not owe it to any business partners." Marcus looked directly at my parents, whose faces were contorted in utter confusion. "Your son," Marcus said, his voice dropping like an anvil, "owes $320,000 to 5 different high-limit, offshore sports betting syndicates and 3 luxury casino lines in Macau and Las Vegas." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was a suffocating, paralyzing vacuum. "No," my mother whispered, shaking her head frantically. "No, that's a lie. He was building a restaurant. We saw the blueprints. We saw the lease agreement. The lease agreement was terminated 18 months ago for non-payment." "Mrs. Hawthorne," Marcus countered effortlessly, bringing up a scanned legal document on the screen. "The restaurant never opened. It never even broke ground. The operating capital he claimed his partner stole? Julian liquidated it himself." Marcus clicked the remote. A dizzying array of transaction receipts flooded the screen. Between April of last year and last Tuesday, Marcus read from his notes, Julian Hawthorne transferred over $400,000 from his business LLC directly into private gambling accounts. Furthermore, when he exhausted the business capital, he began taking out high-interest personal loans to chase his losses. I stared at the screen, a sick, heavy feeling settling into my stomach. It wasn't a business failure. It was a gambling addiction of catastrophic proportions. "But it gets worse," Marcus continued relentlessly, refusing to let the family breathe. He turned his piercing gaze toward my father. "Because Julian didn't just burn through the restaurant capital. He burned through everything else he could get his hands on." Marcus brought up a new slide. It showed a series of wire transfers originating from a very familiar account number. Mr. Arthur Hawthorne, Marcus said, addressing my father, who was currently staring at the screen with wide, horrified eyes. Can you confirm that you and your wife authorized a home equity line of credit withdrawal of $80,000 6 months ago? My father swallowed hard, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Julian. Julian said he needed it to secure the liquor license for the restaurant. He said it was a temporary bridge loan. He promised he'd pay it back when they opened. He didn't use it for a liquor license, Marcus stated brutally. He highlighted the exact routing of the $80,000. He wired the entire sum to a private concierge service in Monaco to cover a catastrophic baccarat debt so they wouldn't break his legs. Julian? My mother choked out, turning to look at her golden child. Tears of absolute horror were streaming down her face. Julian, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me this man is lying. Julian didn't say a word. He was slumped in his expensive chair, staring blankly at the floor. The arrogant, charming entrepreneur was gone. He looked like exactly what he was, a degenerate, lying addict who had destroyed his own life and was now desperately trying to drag his little sister down with him. But Marcus Vance was not finished. He wasn't just gambling, Marcus said, his voice ringing with pure disgust. Because an addict still needs to maintain appearances. While you, Miss Nora Hawthorne, were working 100-hour weeks and living in a studio apartment, your brother was utilizing the remaining loan funds to fund a lifestyle he could not afford, solely to convince his family and his investors that he was successful. Marcus rapidly clicked through a slideshow of absolute financial depravity. $50,000 on private yacht charters in Miami, Marcus listed, the receipts flashing on the screen. $22,000 on custom Rolex watches, $12,000 a month on a luxury penthouse lease that he is currently facing eviction from. He spent your $80,000 liquor license loan, Mr. Hawthorne, and when the mob started knocking on his door, he targeted the only person left in the family with liquid cash. Marcus turned off the projector. The screen went black, plunging the room back into the harsh reality of the fluorescent lights. Julian Hawthorne is not a victim of a bad economy, Marcus concluded, snapping his laptop shut. He is a fraud. If you wire him $320,000 today, Nora, it will not save him. It will be swallowed by offshore gambling syndicates by midnight, and he will be back in debt by next week. My professional fiduciary recommendation as your auditor is to deny this transfer immediately. The silence returned. It was heavier now. It was the sound of a family mythology completely and violently imploding. The silence that settled over the conference room was not a peaceful one. It was a suffocating, ringing vacuum, the kind of absolute stillness that follows a bomb detonating in a confined space. Marcus Vance had just systematically, surgically dismantled the mythology of the Hawthorne family's golden child. The spreadsheets, the offshore wire transfers, the luxury penthouse leases, the casino debts, it was all hanging in the air, an invisible, toxic fog that none of us could breathe in. I looked at my brother. Julian was still slumped in his chair, staring at the blank flat-screen monitor. The charismatic, desperately earnest entrepreneur who had begged me for his life an hour ago was entirely gone. In his place sat a hollow, cornered addict. His tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. The swagger had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked distinctly like a cornered rat. My father, Arthur, was the first to break the silence. Julian, my father croaked, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. He placed his hands flat on the polished conference table, his knuckles trembling. Julian, look at me. Julian didn't move. He kept his eyes glued to the floor. The $80,000, my father said, his voice rising, gaining a desperate, frantic edge. The money we took out of the equity of our house, the house we spent 30 years paying off. You told me it was for a liquor license. You swore to me on your grandfather's grave that the restaurant just needed a bridge loan. It was a sure thing, Dad, Julian mumbled, his voice so low it was barely audible. What? My mother? Helen gasped, leaning forward, her face streaked with ruined makeup and tears of absolute horror. Julian finally looked up, but he didn't look remorseful. He looked irritated. It was a sure thing, Julian snapped, suddenly slamming his fist onto the table, the sudden burst of violence making my mother flinch. I had a system. I had insider information on a European soccer syndicate. If the striker hadn't blown his ACL in the final 10 minutes of the match, the parlay would have hit. I would have cleared $2 million. I would have paid you back, and I would have opened the restaurant in cash. It was an investment. I stared at him, my stomach turning completely upside down. He wasn't apologizing. He was defending the gamble. He was actually genuinely aggrieved that his investment hadn't worked out. "You bet our retirement on a soccer game?" my father whispered, the blood completely draining from his face, leaving him looking sickly and frail. "You took the roof over our heads, and you wired it to a casino?" "You didn't have to give it to me!" Julian shouted back, completely abandoning the victim act, his narcissism flaring up into a blinding, toxic defense mechanism. He pointed an accusatory finger at my parents. "You're the ones who enabled me. You always bailed me out. Every single time I asked, you just handed over the cash. How was I supposed to know how to handle real financial pressure when you never let me fail? This is your fault as much as it is mine." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of his statement felt like a physical blow to the room. My mother let out a guttural, heartbroken wail. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The illusion she had maintained for 32 years, the illusion of her perfect, brilliant, temporarily unlucky son, had violently shattered. She was looking at the monster she had built. "Don't you dare blame us!" my father roared, pushing his chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. He stood up, towering over the table, his face purple with a rage I had never seen before. "We gave you everything. We bankrupted ourselves to send you to a private university. We funded your lifestyle. We gave you our equity. You stole from us. You lied to our faces." "Oh, please," Julian sneered, rolling his eyes, leaning back in his chair with a sickeningly casual arrogance. "You did it because you wanted bragging rights at your stupid country club. You wanted the successful CEO, son. You loved the fantasy just as much as I did. And now that the bill is due, you're all acting like saints." Julian turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with a venomous resentment. "And you," Julian spat, pointing at me. "You couldn't just write the check, could you, Nora? You couldn't just wire the funds and save the family. You had to bring in a bloodhound to humiliate me. You have $500,000 sitting in your bank account right now, money you don't even need. You sit in your pathetic little studio apartment eating instant noodles anyway. You could have cleared my debt today, and none of this would have happened." I sat at the end of the table, feeling a strange, profound sense of detachment. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply observing him, like a scientist observing a hazardous, toxic chemical behind safety glass. "If I had wired you that money, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing clearly across the tense room, "it wouldn't have saved the family. It wouldn't have paid off vendors. You would have wired it straight to a sportsbook in Macau by midnight, trying to win back the 80,000 you stole from Mom and Dad." "I was going to pay the syndicates off," Julian lied, his voice pitching up in desperation. "The guys I owe. Nora, you don't understand who these people are. They aren't banks. They're going to break my legs. They're going to come after me. I need that money." "Then you should probably start running," I said coldly. Julian's jaw dropped. He looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. "What? You're my sister. You're seriously going to let them kill me over money you can afford to lose?" "It is not my money to lose," I said, standing up from my chair. I gathered my purse, moving with a deliberate, unhurried calmness. I worked for 10 years for that money. I sacrificed my youth, my social life, and my health. While you were chartering private yachts in Miami and buying $20,000 watches, I was driving a car without a working heater in the dead of winter. I am not setting myself on fire to keep you warm, Julian. Not today. Not ever. "Mom!" Julian yelled, turning frantically to Helen, acting like a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Mom, tell her! Tell her she has to do it! Family sacrifices for each other! You said it yourself!" My mother looked up. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotchy. She looked at Julian, her golden child, the center of her universe. And then She looked at me. For a fraction of a second, I thought the spell had broken. I thought she would finally apologize to me. I thought she would finally recognize the monstrous reality of what Julian had done. But deeply entrenched family dynamics do not die easily. Nora, my mother whispered, her voice trembling, reaching a hand out toward me across the polished table. Nora, please. He's sick. He has a gambling addiction. It's a disease. We have to help him. If these men are as dangerous as he says, we can't let them hurt him. You have the money. Pay the debt. We'll send him to rehab. I promise. We'll make him pay you back. I stopped. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Even now, even after seeing the spreadsheets, the lies, the stolen home equity, the absolute lack of remorse, even after Julian had just explicitly told them he only used them for their money, my mother was still demanding that I act as his human shield. No, my father interrupted, his voice dropping to a gravelly, defeated rasp. Arthur leaned heavily against the table, looking like a thoroughly broken man. No, Helen. She shouldn't pay his debt. The syndicates are his problem. I looked at my father, surprised by the sudden flash of clarity. But my father didn't look at Julian. He looked directly at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying, desperate panic. Nora, my father said, his voice cracking. The $80,000, the home equity line of credit. If we can't make the balloon payment next month, the bank is going to foreclose on the house. Your mother and I. We're on a fixed pension. We have no savings left. We're going to be homeless. He swallowed hard, stepping toward me. Forget Julian's offshore debts. Let him face the consequences. But please, Nora, you have to pay off the HELOC. You have to save the house. It's only $80,000. You'll still have plenty left over. Please, we're your parents. I stared at the man who had raised me. The man who, just yesterday, had screamed at me, calling me a miser, demanding I hand over my entire life savings to his golden boy. The man who had refused to co-sign a tiny student loan for my education because he had already emptied his accounts for Julian's failed boutique gym. Now, they were drowning. And because the golden child had anchored them to the bottom of the ocean, they expected me to dive in and pull them back to the surface. Mr. Hawthorne, Marcus Vance interjected smoothly. He had been standing quietly at the front of the room, packing his silver laptop into his briefcase. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone carried an absolute, freezing authority. I strongly advise against asking your daughter to assume your liabilities. The fraud committed against you by your son is legally actionable. If you report the fraudulent pretenses under which the loan was acquired to the authorities, you may have legal recourse to freeze the collection actions while the police investigate the embezzlement. Are you insane? My mother shrieked, turning on Marcus with rabid ferocity. We are not sending our son to prison. We are not pressing charges against Julian. Then you are actively choosing to assume the liability of his theft, Marcus replied coolly, clicking his briefcase shut. But you will not pass that liability on to my client. She is our daughter, Arthur yelled, his face turning red again. She owes us. We gave her life. You gave me life, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it silenced the entire room. But you never actually loved me. You only loved him. My parents froze. The absolute, undeniable truth of the statement hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. When I graduated college with honors, you didn't even come to the ceremony because Julian had a networking event in another state. I continued, the memories no longer bringing me pain, but a profound, liberating clarity. When I was working 2 jobs and couldn't afford groceries, you told me it builds character. But when Julian wanted a luxury apartment, you paid his deposit. You spent my entire life teaching me that I was entirely on my own. You taught me that I had to be independent, because nobody in this family was ever going to catch me if I fell. I looked at my mother, whose face was crumbling into a mask of pure devastation. I looked at my father, who couldn't even maintain eye contact with me. Well, I said, stepping away from the table, you succeeded. I am independent. I am completely, totally on my own. And so are you. Nora, wait! My mother cried out, stumbling forward, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, avoiding her grasp. I turned to Julian, who was watching me with wide, panicked eyes, finally realizing that the safety net had been permanently, irrevocably severed. "Good luck with the syndicates, Julian," I said coldly. "I highly suggest you start packing." I turned on my heel and walked out of the glass-walled conference room. I didn't look back. I didn't stop when I heard my mother collapse into a chair, wailing my name. I didn't stop when I heard my father start screaming at Julian, the sounds of their toxic, enabling dynamic finally cannibalizing itself. Marcus Vance walked out of the room right behind me. We walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway of the co-working space in silence. When we reached the elevator lobby, I finally stopped. My knees felt weak, and my hands were trembling from the massive adrenaline crash. I leaned against the cold marble wall, letting out a long, shuddering breath. Marcus stopped beside me. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. He was a man who dealt in facts, in hard data, and he knew exactly what kind of emotional trauma I had just survived. "You did the right thing, Nora," Marcus said quietly. He handed me a sealed manila folder. "This contains the hard copies of all the financial tracing, the bank statements, and the offshore routing numbers. If they try to harass you, or if Julian attempts to fraudulently open lines of credit in your name, which addicts often do when cornered, you have the proof to hand directly to the police." I took the folder, holding it tightly against my chest. "Thank you, Marcus. I mean it. If you hadn't demanded the banking tokens, I would have signed the wire transfer tomorrow. I would have lost everything." "You wouldn't have," Marcus said, offering a small, surprisingly warm smile. "You are smarter than you give yourself credit for. You hired me because your instincts told you they were lying. I just provided the math to back it up." The elevator dinged, the steel doors sliding open. "Go buy your house, Nora," Marcus said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Build your life, and leave the ghosts behind." I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of the hallway, I felt a profound, physical weight lift off my shoulders. The invisible chains of obligation, guilt, and the desperate, pathetic need for my parents' approval simply dissolved. I was free. The aftermath of a family imploding is never clean. It is a messy, drawn-out process of collateral damage and harsh realities. I didn't block their phone numbers immediately. I let them leave voicemails for a week just to document the escalation. Julian's voicemails started out as desperate, weeping apologies, begging me to reconsider. By day 3, they turned into vicious, terrifying threats. He told me the men he owed money to were going to come to my apartment. He told me it would be my fault if he ended up in a ditch. I forwarded those specific recordings to the local police department and filed a formal restraining order against him. By day 7, Julian vanished. The luxury penthouse he had been leasing evicted him, locking the doors and seizing his remaining assets. The offshore syndicates he owed money to apparently caught up with him. He didn't end up dead, but he ended up hospitalized with severe injuries. From what the police told me when they followed up on my restraining order, Julian was subsequently arrested in the hospital bed. He had attempted to forge checks using his former business partner's identity to pay off the medical bills. He was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The golden child was looking at a minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary. My parents' fate was equally tragic, born entirely of their own refusal to hold their son accountable. They refused to press charges against Julian for the $80,000 home equity theft. Because they wouldn't formally declare it as fraud, the bank held them entirely liable for the repayment. With no savings and only a fixed pension, they couldn't make the balloon payments. 2 months after the meeting in the conference room, my childhood home was foreclosed upon. My mother left me one final voicemail on the day the bank locked them out. She was sobbing, blaming me for everything. She said if I had just paid Julian's debt, none of this would have happened. She said I had destroyed the family. I listened to the voicemail once. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of pity for a woman who would rather lose her home and protect a criminal than admit she had made a mistake. I deleted the voicemail. And then, I permanently blocked both of their numbers. I changed my phone number. I moved out of the tiny, drafty studio apartment I had lived in for a decade. 6 months later, on a bright, crisp Tuesday morning in April, I stood on the front porch of a beautiful, mid-century modern house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb. The house had a wraparound porch, a massive kitchen with granite countertops, and a sprawling backyard with an old oak tree. I held a set of heavy brass keys in my hand. I had paid for the house entirely in cash. There was no mortgage. There was no debt. There was absolutely no one who could ever take it away from me. My cybersecurity app was currently being integrated into a major national banking network, and my consulting business was booming. I had hired a small team of developers, and Marcus Vance had officially become my firm's retained financial auditor. He had also, surprisingly, asked me out for coffee the previous week, a development that I was navigating with cautious, genuine optimism. I unlocked the front door of my new house and stepped inside. The air smelled of fresh paint and polished hardwood. It was quiet. It was peaceful. I walked into the massive, sunlit living room. There was no stiff floral sofa. There was no tension. There were no ghosts demanding sacrifices to feed their own egos. I had spent my entire life being told that family must sacrifice for each other. I had been conditioned to believe that love was a transaction, a debt that constantly needed to be repaid through suffering and subservience. But as I stood in the center of the home I had bought with my own sweat, blood, and tears, I finally understood the truth. True family doesn't demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. True family celebrates your light. I took a deep breath, the clean, quiet air filling my lungs. I pulled out my phone, opened my contacts, and permanently deleted the last remaining traces of the Hawthorne family from my digital life. I put the phone in my pocket, walked over to the large bay window, and watched the sun stream into my home. I was finally exactly where I belonged, and I had never been happier.